Hi everyone. It's 1 year after the 2016 election, and so I figured that I would dive back into the Sam Seder versus Jimmy Dore argument about what was the best strategy for the 2016 election. As most of you know, Sam voted for Hillary, Jimmy voted for Stein, so let's play scorecard. S is for Sam, D is for Dore, C is for correct, R is for wrong, O is for oh man, Trump is such hell, A is for actually Hillary would have been lousy as well, R is for rating, prediction so far, C is for the conflict between Seder and Dore, E is for elections, they have consequences, scorecard, 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 scorecard. Now, one strong caveat here, Sam and Jimmy were really not on the same page in terms of their focus. Jimmy treated this election much more like it was a movement election, that the policies of 2017 were subservient to what the country is going to look like 5 or 10 years from now. And Sam saw the election as much more of an immediate, practical strategy that we need to have Hillary in office right now because there are people who are getting really hurt and great amounts of damage under Trump right now. And he sort of figured, well, we'll cross other bridges when we might come to them in the future, we might not. I am more inclined to side with Jimmy's framing, not necessarily his conclusions, but his framing on this, for two reasons. One, I think it's a short and not very interesting argument to take Sam's framing, which is who would you rather have running the country right now, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? That seems unquestionable to me. Hillary Clinton would be a far superior president to Trump on healthcare, on the environment, on Puerto Rico, on 100 different issues. That is pretty much undisputable at this point. And so you have to kind of grant Sam that argument. It's not a very interesting conversation. Also, I think that politics is something that, yes, sometimes things happen immediately, but usually it's not something that's week to week or month to month. It takes a long time for us to really see the fruits of what we are doing now. It takes several years. And so I want to kind of see if I can look ahead to about 2024 to see what is most likely going to happen between the two parties and in the country in that time, and see who had the better long-term strategy in 2016. Here I show a chart. These are my own opinions as to what I think will happen, what I think would have happened. As you can see, it is more likely, far more likely, that a Democrat will win in 2020, in my view, because Trump won in 2016, and it would be far more likely that a Republican would have won in 2020 had Hillary been elected. Because of that, if we're looking at a long-term view of 2024, it is likely that both parties would have been in the White House at certain points during that time. And this is important because it is no longer just, well, Hillary versus Trump. We're talking about Hillary and the next Republican versus Trump and the next Democrat. And certainly the next Democrat may end up doing a lot of the things that Hillary is pushing, would be pushing now. In some ways, Trump is a typical Republican and would be doing the same things that a future Republican would do. In some ways, Trump is different. And so some of the calculation is just which aspects of specifically Trump are making things worse for the country than a generic Republican would, assuming that we have to face both a Republican and a Democrat in the White House over the next 8 years. I hope that people are able to follow that and agree with me that that is a discussion worth having. So issue one, the judiciary. This has always been one of Jimmy's weakest arguments. Jimmy was under the belief that the Democrats would be able to block or filibuster a Supreme Court nominee for 2 years until they took control of the Senate. That thus implies that he didn't believe that they would have the Senate in 2017. And so he was making a false equivalence and saying, well, the Republicans blocked Garland for a year, and so why couldn't Democrats do the same thing? But he was ignoring the possibility that Republicans could get rid of the judicial filibuster and just cram in whatever nominee they wanted to, and that is exactly what happened. There were also 100 different lower court seats that Trump and McConnell have been pretty effective in filling so far, and I can give Jimmy a couple of points in the fact that part of this is, of course, the Democrats' fault. They should have screamed and screamed for an entire year about the Garland nomination being blocked. They should have used absolutely every single tool that they had to make the Republicans pay an incredible price for blocking a Supreme Court justice for a year. And really the same thing with those lower court seats as well. I mean, the judiciary is a major, major aspect of getting progressive legislation through, and the Democrats did not seem as though they made any of this much of an issue at all. Not to mention the fact that they should have pressured Ginsburg and Breyer to step down years ago when there was a Democratic president, and they would have been replaced by now. But you still have to award Sam most of the points here, because if we're talking about America in 2024, rather than having a 5-4 Supreme Court with 5 judges that were appointed by Democrats, which would have had massive influence on policies going forward, you have another conservative court now, and this is going to affect policies for decades. And even if you got a progressive in office in 2021, you're not going to be able to reverse this damage. So I'm going to give 8 points to Sam here and 2 points to Jimmy. Issue 2, legislative. Now, this is almost the opposite. A lot of this is going to be contingent upon the tax cuts, whether or not they pass. And my prediction, there is still about an 80% chance that the tax cuts are going to pass. That is down from there being nearly a 100% chance, I thought, 3 months ago. I couldn't believe it was possible for the Republicans not to get these tax cuts through. I now believe it is possible that they will not, but they still probably will. In a 2024 America, these tax cuts are still going to be very, very strongly felt and a massive damage to the economy. And so you have to give some points to Sam there. But of course, they haven't passed yet. And otherwise, legislatively, it's hard to find almost anything that Trump has scored a legislative victory on. And it is very possible that if Hillary had won in 2016, by 2021, the Republicans would have a larger majority in Congress, and they would have a president more like Pence or Cotton or somebody who was able to work with the legislature and actually had an interest in doing so. And so you might actually see more legislative victories for Republicans between now and 2024 than you're seeing now. So I'm going to give Jimmy 7 points here and Sam 3 points. Issue 3, executive. Now, there are many on the left, including Jimmy, who have been saying, well, Trump isn't really getting much done during his agenda. He's really sort of a failure, a screw-up. I don't really buy that. The amount of damage that he has done through executive orders or just executive appointments is remarkable. The damage to the EPA, to public schools, to our rivers and streams, to Obamacare, is something that, again, is probably irreversible, even if you were to get a Democrat, a good Democrat, into office in 2021. So the only way that I can give Jimmy any points at all is by recognizing that he is correct, that this is 30 years of the executive gaining more and more power under both parties without really any pushback. And it was the same kind of thing that any typical Republican would have done in 2021 anyway. But still, this is Sam's strongest argument and his argument that is most close to sort of immediate pragmatism. And so I'm going to give Sam 9 points. I'm going to give Jimmy 1 point here. Issue 4, cultural/social. I believe that Trump has presented a unique danger to our culture. I think all Republicans, the Republican Party has pretty much been taken over by what I call Trumpism. Even if it wasn't him, the sort of acceptance of bullying, the acceptance of casual racism, the treating of any inconvenient data as being fake. These are all things that are very harmful to a society. It will not be easily reversed or fixed, even again with a Democratic president in 4 years. And while I think that this would have happened to some extent anyway, Trump in charge is particularly bad because he endorses and encourages, and sort of there's a movement, a populist movement around the things that Trump says in a way in which that is not necessarily true of other politicians. And so I'm going to give Sam 6 points here and Jimmy 4 points. Hillary Clinton would not have engendered this level of cultural kind of corrosion that Trump has. Issue number 5, military. This is going to largely depend on what happens with North Korea. Obviously, Trump could be much, much, much worse than a typical Republican if we end up in a nuclear conflict with North Korea. That almost closes the book on this entire argument. If so, that of course hasn't happened yet. We'll have to see what does occur. Generally, Trump's foreign policy has not been all that much worse than what Hillary would have done. We would have been, if Hillary were president, in conflict with Russia, in Syria. She would probably have made the same deal with the Saudis. We would certainly continue our drone program. And so I think that the potential for Trump to do much worse is what is going to give a little bit of an edge here in my mind to Sam's argument, but it's close. I'm going to give Sam 6 points here and Jimmy 4 points. Issue 6, corruption and sort of the systemic way in which our government works. So the rules have fallen away, I think, completely on corruption. This would have happened with Hillary as well. I think Trump gets away with it more absurdly, but Hillary would have gotten away with it more subversively. Both would have eroded faith in our institutions to get anything positive done, and our system would have remained completely broken under both of them. I don't know that having Hillary and then a generic Republican would have done any worse damage than Trump and a generic Democrat would do. So I'm going to score this 5-5. Issue number 7, continuity and change. Jimmy expressed a hope that a few things would happen in terms of change if Trump were president. He liked the fact that Trump would sometimes go after, like, the Bushes and go after other Republicans, and thought maybe this would be a trend. It hasn't really been. Trump has much more been a typical Republican on almost every policy issue, despite the fact that he yells at them a lot, and there's a lot of kind of ego contests between them. But otherwise, there is pretty much a lot of continuity between what Trump is doing and what Bush is doing. Of course, we would have had complete continuity if Hillary had been elected. Her entire agenda pretty much was just being Obama's third term. So we would have seen about the same amount of continuity that we are seeing now. The one reason that I'm giving Jimmy a slight edge is because there is a certain revulsion of Trump that is very high profile, and I think it might have a slightly bigger effect in terms of getting change more quickly. In other words, the grassroots determining more quickly that they are fed up with today's politics and want to have something new. There's something about Trump that I think brings that a little bit more viscerally to the forefront. And so we're going to go with 6 points for Jimmy and 4 for Sam here. Issue 8, ideology. This is a question of whether or not a Trump presidency is going to make the country more left-wing or more right-wing. Now, I think that the left has gained momentum over the last year, but I don't really think it's because of the 2016 general election. I think it's more because of Bernie Sanders and that movement. Trump doesn't himself seem to be moving the left any more leftward than they already were. Meanwhile, the right is not shying away from ultra-conservative ideals either, even those that hate Trump are simply saying that he isn't a true conservative. I would say it's most likely that if Trump's presidency is deemed a failure by history, they're going to say that he was an enigmatic politician that had problems with both sides rather than being sort of a bastion of conservatism. So I don't really see how his presidency ideologically affects the country in 2024. So I'm going to give a split 5-5 on this. Issue number 9, politics. This is whether or not the Democrats or Republicans are better off with Trump in office. This is where Jimmy is going to score some serious points. Jimmy said that Trump would split the GOP and galvanize the Democrats. Thus far, a little of that has begun to happen. The establishment Democratic Party certainly seems not interested in changing at all. And so you can't give full credit for that, but it does seem as though Democrats are picking up quite a bit. People looked at the early results of the special elections and said, see, Republicans continue to win. Those were in very, very safe seats. Now that we're seeing actual competitive races, the Democrats are doing very well, including a couple of nights ago. The Democrats, apparently, I have heard that they are polling 12 points above their 2016 numbers. If that happens, then that would be a gigantic landslide if that happens in 2018. And there is no way that anyone can convince me that such a thing would have happened if Hillary were the president. I mean, nothing seems to excite the right and demoralize the left more than an ineffectual Democratic leader that basically tells us that everything is all okay. Meanwhile, the Republicans have continued mostly to support Trump, but he has lost 14 points among evangelicals. He has lost 15 points among college-educated white men since the election. And so we are beginning to see a bit of a split, one which I don't think that we would have seen if Hillary were president, because all of that anger would have been directed toward her rather than directed toward the Republicans. If somehow the tax cuts fail, then I think we will see a massive, massive breaking apart of the Republican Party, which is something that Jimmy really did predict. And so I'm going to give Jimmy 7 points here and Sam 3 points. And finally, 2020. This is a question as to who I think is going to be elected. As I mentioned, there are paths to victory for Trump or Pence if Trump is no longer there by 2020. But despite the Democrats being awful, they are far more likely to elect a president in 2020 than to re-elect Hillary. And the president is far more likely to be better than Hillary on many key issues. The dream, in my opinion, would be somebody like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, maybe, but it's going to be hard for the Democrats to find a candidate that had more flaws and was more conservative than Hillary Clinton getting through a 2020 primary against Trump. And so Jimmy's going to get 8 points here, and Sam will get 2 points. So let's tally up the scores, and it's razor thin, but I have Sam right now at 51, Jimmy at 49, and this is something that will continue to be in flux again as certain things continue to happen. But for right now, we're going to say Sam wins, scorecard, razor thin, scorecard. Thank you very much.